On our wedding anniversary, my husband ordered oysters and black caviar for his relatives. And when the bill came, Carolina stood by the panoramic office window, watching autumn leaves waltz in the wind below. From the 21st floor of the Tijuana Business Center, she could see nearly half the city, from the waterfront to the residential districts, where she and Ricardo had an apartment in one of the high-rises. Or rather, her apartment. She sighed and looked at the clock. 6 p.m. One more hour of work, and then she could head home to celebrate their 5th wedding anniversary. 5 years. A strange milestone. Not round like 10, but no longer the first, when it feels like your whole life is ahead of you. 5 years meant something already settled and established, like her relationship with Ricardo. She remembered meeting Ricardo Herrera at a contemporary art exhibition. He was standing in front of an abstract painting, looking so serious and thoughtful that Carolina couldn't help but smile. "Trying to figure out which side is up?" she asked. Ricardo turned to her, and his face instantly lit up with a smile. "Actually, I was wondering how this could be worth $3 million. If I'd drawn something like this as a kid, my mom would have given me a spanking." They both laughed, and an hour later they were sitting in a cafe across from the exhibition center. Ricardo turned out to be a great conversationalist, well-read, with a good sense of humor. He talked about working at an IT company, about plans to start his own business, about his travels across the US and Europe. Carolina was just starting her career at an ad agency and was captivated by his ambition and outlook on life. The romance developed quickly. 3 months later, they were living together in her apartment, and 6 months after that, they were married. It was a modest ceremony, no lavish celebration, just close friends and both sets of parents. That was when Carolina met Dolores for the first time. A stern, wiry woman with a piercing gaze and tight lips, she gave Carolina a once-over, as if calculating the value of each part of her outfit. Then she forced a smile and said something that only years later would take on a deeper meaning. "I hope you'll make my boy happy. He's special. He needs the right kind of care." Carolina's phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her back to reality. A message from Ricardo. "Hope you won't be late. I have a surprise for you." She smiled. Lately, surprises between them had become rare, and so had quality time together. She often stayed late at work, and well, what about Ricardo? 3 years ago, his promising IT career had suddenly ended. The company shut down, and instead of looking for a job in his field, Ricardo decided it was a sign from the universe. It was time to launch his own startup. Only the startup never moved past talks and presentations, which for some reason never excited anyone, and the money slowly disappeared. First went Ricardo's savings, then their joint account. Carolina hadn't even noticed when she became the family's sole breadwinner. Fortunately, her career was thriving. From a junior manager, she rose to department head, and then to deputy creative director of the agency. But her relationship with Ricardo grew more strained. He got irritated when she worked late, sulked if she didn't praise his latest business idea, and increasingly spent his time gaming or talking on the phone with his mother. Dolores called almost every day. After each call, Ricardo would become jittery and tense. Carolina noticed the shift in his mood but chalked it up to an extended midlife crisis. After all, he was 35, an age when men often feel their failures most acutely. A year ago, Ricardo took a job as a delivery driver for an online store. Temporary, he explained, until something better came along. But nothing better ever did, and the courier's salary barely covered his personal expenses. Their last vacation, the kitchen renovation, Ricardo's new laptop, all of it was paid for by Carolina. She didn't reproach him, hoping he'd bounce back and become the ambitious man she once fell in love with. Their life together had become a strange performance, where both pretended everything was fine. But sometimes late at night, watching her husband sleep, Carolina would catch herself thinking she was living with a complete stranger. Another message from Ricardo interrupted her thoughts. "Order a taxi for 8 p.m. Don't be late." Carolina paused. They usually celebrated anniversaries at home, cooked something nice, opened a bottle of wine, watched a movie. The last time they went out to a restaurant, she had paid the entire bill, even though the idea was Ricardo's. That memory stung a little, and Carolina decided to suggest an alternative. "Maybe we should celebrate at home? I could make your favorite steaks, she replied. The reply came almost instantly. No, I've already arranged everything. It's a special day. I know you're tired, but I want to make you happy. Carolina smiled. Maybe she was overthinking things. After all, Ricardo had put in the effort, planned a surprise. That was sweet of him. She remembered overhearing a phone conversation just 2 days ago. Ricardo had been speaking in a hushed voice tucked away in the corner of the kitchen. Mom, enough. I've made up my mind. Yes, I know you mean well, but this is my choice, Mom. Carolina deserves this. When she entered the kitchen, Ricardo abruptly ended the call and gave her a strained smile. He must have been planning this surprise and consulting with his mother, though Dolores's advice rarely benefited their relationship. Carolina sighed and returned to her desk. On the computer screen blinked an unfinished ad campaign project for a major cosmetics brand. For the past 2 months, she had worked on it almost without weekends. If it went well, the agency would land a long-term contract and she'd receive a hefty bonus. Maybe then she and Ricardo could finally take a vacation. Relax, talk heart to heart. Remember why they chose each other in the first place. Carolina, it's your anniversary today, right? Patricia, a colleague and longtime friend, peeked into the office. Why are you still here? Go home, do your makeup, get dressed up. 5 years is no joke. Just finishing the presentation for Elegia. Ricardo planned something for tonight. I don't want to be late. Patricia perched on the edge of the desk, eyeing her friend thoughtfully. How are things with you two anyway? You've been looking really tense lately. Carolina shrugged. Fine, typical married life. He works, I work. And how long has he been a courier now? Patricia was never known for her tact. A year, year and a half? Isn't he tired of delivering pizza? Not pizza, online store packages, Carolina corrected automatically. He's just going through a rough patch. He's looking for something better. Patricia snorted. Meanwhile, you're working for two and supporting his mother, judging by all those birthday gifts he brought her. Didn't you say he bought her some super expensive appliance? Patri, not today, please, Carolina said wearily. It's still a special day. Her friend immediately softened. Sorry. Of course, it's a celebration, and I hope it's a great one. Maybe Ricardo will ask to renew your vows or give you a diamond ring. You never know. They both laughed, but Carolina caught herself thinking she honestly had no idea what kind of surprise Ricardo had in store. Over the past year, he had become so unpredictable, sometimes going weeks without a spark of initiative, then suddenly obsessed with a new idea, though his enthusiasm rarely lasted, especially if it required effort or financial investment. At 7:30, Carolina closed her office and took the elevator down. A black sedan was waiting in the parking lot, the taxi Ricardo had arranged. The driver was quiet, and while they slowly navigated through evening traffic, Carolina touched up her lipstick and smoothed her hair. The simple black dress she had worn to work was elegant enough for a restaurant, and the string of pearls around her neck, a gift from Ricardo on their first anniversary, added a touch of class. The taxi stopped in front of El Dorado, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. Carolina raised her eyebrows in surprise. Was Ricardo really going all out? With what money? Then again, maybe he'd been saving from his recent paychecks to do something special for her. The thought warmed her heart. She paid the driver and headed to the entrance. A doorman opened the door for her with practiced grace, and in the lobby, a sharply dressed host greeted her. Good evening. Welcome to El Dorado. Will you be joining someone? Yes, a reservation under Herrera. Ricardo Herrera. The host checked his tablet and nodded. Your party has already arrived. Allow me to show you to them. Party? Carolina asked, surprised. Did Ricardo invite friends? But when they reached a private room at the back of the restaurant and the host opened the door, Carolina froze on the threshold. Seated at a long table covered in a pristine white tablecloth were about 20 people, and presiding at the head of the table like a queen on her throne was Dolores. Ricardo jumped up nervously from his seat and hurried over to Carolina. Darling, there you are. Everyone's already here. He gave her a quick kiss on the cheek and whispered in her ear. Surprise! Mom decided we should celebrate as a family this time. Carolina looked at him for a long moment, trying to tell if he was joking. But Ricardo was already pulling her toward the table, where his entire extended family was waiting, and she had no choice but to smile and pretend this was exactly the anniversary celebration she had dreamed of. El Dorado smelled of expensive perfume and faint hints of fresh flowers. Carolina tried to maintain her smile as Ricardo introduced her to the guests, as though they hadn't all known her for 5 years, like she was meeting this loud, judgmental clan for the first time. And here's our little workaholic. Dolores rose from her place at the head of the table. Her perfectly styled graying hair and dark navy dress gave her the air of a strict headmistress at an elite boarding school. Managed to tear herself away from her all-important job. She hugged Carolina, engulfing her in a suffocating cloud of pricey perfume. The hug felt more like a hold. The woman's bony fingers dug into her back, and her dry lips brushed her cheek. Carolina felt Dolores pause near her ear and whisper, "I hope you appreciate our little surprise, dear." Carolina pulled away and surveyed the gathering. Ricardo's three sisters, Gloria, Anna, and Margarita, were seated with their husbands. Children of all ages, from the baby in Gloria's arms to a brooding teenager glued to his phone, filled half the table. In the far corner sat Ricardo's cousins with their wives, and next to Dolores sat Uncle Roberto, his late father's brother, a burly man with a fleshy nose and beady eyes. "Sit here, Carolina," Anna sang out, the youngest of Ricardo's sisters. "We saved you a spot next to Ricardo." Carolina sat down, feeling irritation rising in her chest. The seat next to Ricardo was tightly wedged between him and Anna, whose husband Fernando, a portly man with a shiny bald head, had already made significant progress on a bottle of whiskey. "You look beautiful tonight," Ricardo whispered, nervously fidgeting with his napkin. "Mom wanted to throw us a real party. Can you believe she reserved the whole private room?" "I can see that," Carolina replied dryly. "Why didn't you tell me it was going to be a family event?" "I wanted it to be a surprise," Ricardo shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "Besides, Mom organized it all last minute." Carolina seriously doubted Dolores ever did anything last minute. That woman planned every move with the precision of a Swiss watch. "Carolina," Margarita, the eldest sister, called out across the table, "tell us how work is going. We were just talking with the girls about how important you are now." "Ricardo says you're some kind of director?" "Associate Creative Director," Carolina corrected automatically, already feeling herself pulled into a conversation she had no desire to join. "Oh my!" Margarita widened her eyes theatrically. "And how many people do you manage?" 12 in my department." "Wow, a real businesswoman," Anna giggled, turning to her sister. "And our Ricardo's just sitting at home all alone, while you're off being the boss." Carolina wanted to respond, but at that moment a waiter approached the table, and Dolores immediately took charge. No, we won't be ordering from the menu. Bring us the chef's tasting menu, double portions, and also," she leaned toward the waiter, whispered something, and he nodded respectfully before disappearing. Carolina noticed Ricardo giving his mother a worried glance and muttering something to her. Dolores simply waved him off and continued her ordering spree. "We'll have that red wine. What's it called?" She turned to the sommelier who had appeared beside her chair. "Chateau Margaux, 2010 vintage. 3 bottles to start." Ricardo tried to interject again, but Dolores raised her hand regally to stop him. "Ricardo, don't interrupt. It's a special day. We're not skimping. Besides, Carolina deserves a proper celebration, don't you, dear?" She looked at Carolina with a smile that held not a trace of warmth. "For the kids, order milkshakes and children's champagne," Dolores went on, "and bring more caviar, red and black. We need something to snack on while they prepare the main courses." Carolina felt her fingers go numb. The bill had already clearly passed 100,000, and her mother-in-law was just getting started. "Mom, maybe we shouldn't go overboard." Ricardo tried to interject again, but Dolores only laughed. "Ricardo, don't be a bore. Tonight we're celebrating." She gestured grandly toward the table, and the whole family responded with enthusiastic approval. Uncle Roberto even slammed his fist on the table, sloshing wine from his glass. "That's right, Dolores. It's not like we can't afford a proper dinner once a year. Let's drink to the happy couple." Carolina glanced at Ricardo out of the corner of her eye. He sat there pale, a stiff smile on his face, nervously twisting a napkin under the table. It was obvious he hadn't initiated this madness. The waiters began to bring out appetizers, exquisite canapes with red caviar, tuna tartare, beef carpaccio, foie gras with fig jam. The entire family attacked the food with the enthusiasm of people who hadn't seen a decent meal in months. The children were the most enthusiastic, grabbing the most expensive bites and immediately losing interest, leaving half-eaten delicacies scattered around their plates. "Margarita, is your Diego still studying in Miami?" Dolores asked her eldest daughter while spreading butter on her toast. "Yes, Mom," Margarita replied proudly. "Second year. Carlos and I barely managed to scrape together the money for this semester. We had to sell the summer house." "Well, education is sacred," Dolores nodded. "Just look at the career Carolina's built thanks to hers. Too bad she doesn't have time for children." She looked at Carolina with false sympathy. "You two should really start thinking about it. 5 years together, and still nothing. I had 3 kids by the time I was 30. Carolina felt her face flush. The topic of children was a sore one. She and Ricardo had tried 2 years ago, but it hadn't worked out. And then, with everything else going on, especially their worsening finances, they'd pushed it aside. "We're not planning on it right now," she said coolly. "We want to get more stability first." "Stability?" Gloria, the middle sister, smirked while rocking her baby son. "You already earn more than anyone in this family. How much more stable do you need to be?" "I've got 3 and we're doing just fine," Anna chimed in. "I stay home and my husband brings in the income. I just can't imagine leaving my babies all day." She leaned over and gave her daughter a demonstrative kiss on the head. Carolina noticed the girl didn't even look up from her tablet. "Everyone's circumstances are different," Ricardo tried to step in. "Carolina and I just—" Yes, you're both very busy people," Dolores cut him off. "Especially Carolina. Poor Ricardo often tells me how late you stay at the office. At least you bring in a decent paycheck." Gloria and Anna exchanged knowing looks. Carolina choked on her wine and started coughing. So Ricardo had been complaining to his mother about her working too much, but hadn't mentioned anything about his own lack of contribution to their finances. "By the way, how's your job going, Ricardo?" Carolina asked, trying to change the subject. "You said they might promote you to senior courier." Ricardo flinched like he'd been shocked and shot her a panicked glance. Dolores jumped in quickly. "Oh, please, that's not even a real job. Ricardo's only doing that temporarily, until his business takes off. He's got a startup that's about to launch." Carolina had to bite her tongue not to scoff. That so-called startup had been about to launch for the past 3 years and hadn't moved an inch. "Yes, I've almost finished the business plan," Ricardo mumbled, avoiding his wife's eyes. "I'll start looking for investors soon." "What's the business idea?" Fernando, Anna's husband, slurred from across the table. He'd been quietly downing whiskey until now. "You mentioned something about an app?" "It's an innovative platform for—" Ricardo began, but Dolores interrupted. "Oh, look, the main courses are here. Those steaks look wonderful." And indeed, the waiters began placing steaming plates of steaks, seafood, and side dishes on the table. The children perked up and reached eagerly for the food, creating a commotion. Carolina noticed one of the boys, probably Margarita's son, managed to knock over a glass of juice all over the tablecloth. Dolores immediately summoned a waiter and demanded not only a new tablecloth, but a full reset of the entire table setting. "And bring another bottle of that lovely wine," she added, "and ice cream for the children. All kinds. Let them try everything you've got." Carolina watched the whole scene unfold as if it were a surreal play. This dinner had nothing to do with celebrating her and Ricardo's anniversary. It was some sort of bizarre family gathering where the star of the show was Dolores, and everyone else, including the couple being honored, were just extras in her performance. "It's a shame you couldn't cook the anniversary dinner yourself," Gloria suddenly said, turning to Carolina. "Ricardo always praised your culinary talents." "When would she have time to cook?" Dolores sighed. "She's at work from morning till night. Poor Ricardo often has to reheat dinner himself." Carolina clenched her jaw. This conversation was starting to grate on her nerves. She clearly remembered how, for the past several months, she had been cooking dinners in advance for 2 or 3 days. Ricardo only had to heat them up. And how often he ignored the food entirely, preferring to order pizza or tacos. Actually, I cook quite often, she said calmly. Ricardo just seems to forget to mention it. She looked at her husband, but he pretended to be deeply engrossed in conversation with Uncle Roberto. Men are so forgetful, Ana chimed in. My Fernando never remembers anything I do for him either. I just bought him new shoes. He didn't even notice. Well, at least my husband earns a decent living, Margarita threw in, glancing at Carolina. It's pretty upsetting when a woman has to carry the whole family on her back. Carolina felt something boil up inside her. She knew exactly where this conversation was heading. Ricardo's sisters had never liked her. Too independent, too successful. In their view, a woman should stay home with the kids and shower her husband with praise, even if he could barely make ends meet. You know, I'm proud of my work, she said firmly, and I thought Ricardo was proud of my success too. Of course, darling, Ricardo mumbled, finally joining the conversation. I'm always proud of you. He placed his hand on her shoulder, but Carolina could feel the insincerity in the gesture. It was as if he were playing a part in a play, directed by someone else. And here comes the cake, Dolores suddenly exclaimed, and all heads turned toward the entrance of the room. Two waiters rolled in a cart carrying a massive three-tier cake, adorned with fresh flowers and gold figurines. At the top sat a big number 5 and two porcelain figures of a bride and groom. That's an exact replica of our wedding cake, Carolina said in surprise, staring at the confectionery masterpiece. I tried to recreate it from the photos, Dolores announced proudly. Had it custom made at a specialty bakery. It cost a fortune, but it was worth it. Carolina turned her gaze to Ricardo. He sat with his head low, looking like he wanted to sink beneath the table from the tension. And who paid for the cake? Carolina asked quietly, leaning toward him. We'll talk later, he replied just as quietly. Not now. But Carolina was already beginning to piece it together. This entire evening wasn't just a surprise. It was a carefully orchestrated performance, and she had a very clear idea of who the director was. And now let's raise a glass to our newlyweds, Dolores declared, lifting her glass, to 5 years of happy marriage, and may the next 5 bring the sound of children's laughter and true family bliss into their home. Everyone raised their glasses. Uncle Roberto even stood up, swaying slightly, and announced, To Ricardo and his wonderful wife, live well and don't forget your family. Carolina forced a smile and sipped her wine. It was rich and expensive, yet somehow tasted bland. The entire evening was soaked in falseness and a kind of quiet hostility. The children swarmed the cake, grabbing the flowers and figurines with their hands before anyone had a chance to cut it. One of the girls dropped a piece on her dress, and her mother, Carolina thought it was Gloria, immediately demanded a stain remover from a waiter. Where'd that cake come from? Fernando slurred, clearly drunk by now. That thing had to cost at least $40,000. It's a gift from Carolina, Dolores said suddenly, turning to her daughter-in-law with a smile. She wanted to treat us all. Carolina froze, fork in hand. Excuse me, what? Well, of course, Dolores continued smoothly, still smiling. Ricardo said you insisted on celebrating the anniversary with the family. Carolina slowly turned to look at Ricardo. He sat with his head down, looking like he wanted to vanish into thin air. Ricardo? Her voice rang out louder than expected in the sudden silence. Is it true? Caro, we'll talk later, he muttered, not lifting his eyes. Not now. No, now, she insisted, feeling a coldness settle inside her. Did you also tell your mother I would be paying for this entire banquet? Ricardo finally looked up at her, his eyes full of guilt, like a cornered animal. Mom suggested we celebrate with family, and I thought... Thought what? Carolina cut him off. That I should pay for dinner for 20 people in the most expensive restaurant in the city? Well, you've always said that family is more important than money, Dolores chimed in with feigned innocence. Or are we not family to you? Carolina looked at her mother-in-law for a long moment. For the first time, she truly understood that she had been living in an illusion. This woman had never accepted her, never considered her worthy of her son, and had been pulling strings all along to sabotage their marriage. I never agreed to pay for this dinner, Carolina said firmly, and this is the first I'm hearing that Ricardo promised to do so in my name. An awkward silence fell over the table. Even the children stopped making noise, sensing the adults' tension. Ricardo's sisters exchanged glances and Uncle Roberto coughed and muttered something about needing another drink. "Maybe you just forgot?" Dolores suggested sweetly. "You're so busy with work. You could have forgotten such a little detail." "I didn't forget," Carolina said coldly, "because that conversation never happened. Ricardo, please explain what's going on." But instead of answering, Ricardo suddenly stood up. I need to use the bathroom. Excuse me." And with that, he quickly walked out of the room, leaving Carolina alone with his family, and with the massive unpaid bill that she now realized must be astronomical. "Ricardo can be so shy sometimes," Dolores sighed. "Oh well, I'm sure it'll all get sorted out. In the meantime, let's enjoy the evening." She beckoned to a waiter and announced loudly, "Bring the champagne. The most expensive you have." Carolina sat motionless, realizing she had been trapped in a scenario meticulously orchestrated by her mother-in-law and allowed by her husband. And now she faced a choice: obediently foot the bill for someone else's party or cause a scene in front of the entire family. She took a deep breath and slowly stood up. "Excuse me, I need to speak with my husband." She walked toward the restrooms, aware of every pair of eyes following her. Carolina moved quickly across the restaurant, avoiding eye contact with the other diners. The feeling of unreality intensified, as if she had stepped into some absurd film. The marble columns, crystal chandeliers, and flawlessly dressed staff all felt like props in a show where she had been cast as the victim. Outside the restrooms, she stopped. The men's and women's rooms faced each other, both with heavy oak doors and gilded handles. Carolina knocked on the men's door. "Ricardo," she called, "we need to talk." No answer. She waited a few seconds and knocked again, louder this time. "Ricardo, I know you're in there. Come out now." Still no response. Carolina steeled herself and pushed the door open. Inside was a small lounge area with a bench, mirrors, and a second door leading to the bathroom itself. She knocked on that door. "Ricardo, stop hiding. This is ridiculous and childish." Silence. Carolina pushed the door open and stepped inside. The spacious restroom, with its individual stalls, black marble sinks, and gilded mirrors, was completely empty. "Ricardo," she called uncertainly, though she already knew. He wasn't there. Carolina stepped back into the hallway and looked around. Had he really run away? Left her to deal with this nightmare alone? The thought was so wild it barely made sense. Just then, a young waiter rounded the corner, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. "Excuse me," Carolina called out to the waiter. "Did you see a man just now, tall, wearing a gray suit, heading toward the restrooms?" The waiter paused for a moment, thinking. "Yes, senora. He walked down the corridor and exited through the service door. I offered to help, but he said he needed some fresh air urgently and would find his own way." Carolina felt the ground slip from under her feet, so her suspicion was right. Ricardo had actually run away, leaving her to deal with the fallout from this entire family dinner. "When was this?" she asked, already knowing the answer. 15, maybe 20 minutes ago," the waiter replied. "He looked unwell. I offered to call a taxi, but he declined." Carolina mechanically pulled out her phone and dialed her husband's number. It rang, but no one picked up. After the 5th attempt, it went to voicemail. "This is Ricardo. I can't take your call right now. Leave a message." "Ricardo," Carolina said quietly, "I know you ran. I don't understand what's going on, but if you don't return to the restaurant in the next 10 minutes, consider us to have a serious problem." She hung up and took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts. She needed to go back to the dining room and somehow explain Ricardo's absence to his family. But first, she had to find out how much this celebration was going to cost. She stopped a passing manager. "Excuse me, I need to know the current total of the bill for the private banquet in the small hall." The manager, a young man with perfectly styled hair and a polished smile, checked his tablet. "You mean the banquet under the name Herrera?" he asked. "Yes, that's the one." "One moment." He swiped quickly through the screen and then said, "As of now, the bill is 287,000 pesos, but orders are still being added. A vintage champagne and additional desserts were just requested." Carolina felt a chill sweep through her. Almost 300,000 pesos. That was more than her monthly salary, and judging by Dolores's appetite, the number would only grow. "And tell me," she asked, keeping her voice as steady as she could, "who was listed as responsible for the bill?" The manager glanced at the tablet again. Mr. Herrera indicated that the check would be covered by his wife, Carolina Herrera. He explained that he was having trouble with his bank card. That was the last straw. Carolina felt a storm of rage and humiliation boil inside her. Ricardo hadn't just fled, he had planned this in advance, knowing he wouldn't be able to pay, and set her up to cover it all. "I understand," she said coldly. "Thank you for the information." Carolina returned to the dining hall, where the party was in full swing. Children were running between tables, the adults were loudly talking over each other, and Dolores, seated like a queen at the head of the table, was barking orders at the waiters, demanding more steak sauce or another helping of caviar. "And here's our beauty," Dolores exclaimed when she spotted Carolina. "Where's Ricardo?" "I'd like to know that myself," Carolina said, approaching the table. "It seems he left the restaurant." "Left?" Dolores feigned surprise, though Carolina caught a flicker of something in her eyes. "Satisfaction? Where did he go?" "He exited through the service door about 20 minutes ago," Carolina replied, watching her mother-in-law closely. "And he's not answering his phone." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Even the children quieted, sensing something was wrong. "Perhaps he wasn't feeling well," Dolores finally said, her voice too carefully controlled. "He gets those migraines sometimes, needs fresh air right away." "And didn't think to tell anyone?" Carolina let the sarcasm seep into her tone. "Not even his wife?" "Ricardo's always been that way," Margarita sighed. "Remember how he used to run out of class whenever he was called to the blackboard?" "He even ran away from his first date," Ana giggled. "Poor Lucia Gonzalez cried all night." Carolina looked at these people and couldn't believe what she was hearing. They were talking about a 35-year-old man as if this behavior was normal, as if it was perfectly acceptable to just run away, leaving his wife to deal with an enormous bill and 20 hungry relatives. "I think it's time for everyone to leave," Carolina said firmly. "The evening is over." "What do you mean, over?" Dolores protested. "We've only just started. The children haven't finished their desserts, and Roberto and I were going to order cognac." "It's over," Carolina repeated, her anger rising. "Because Ricardo ran off, the restaurant bill is nearly 300,000 pesos, and for some reason, he listed me as responsible for payment." Silence fell over the table again. Even Dolores looked uncomfortable now, though more because the scheme had been exposed than out of any real shame. "Well, darling," she said in a syrupy voice at last, "this is your anniversary. Naturally, the cost should be shared. And considering that you earn much more than Ricardo—" "That has nothing to do with it," Carolina snapped. "I never agreed to this dinner, and I'm not going to pay for it." "But Ricardo said—" Gloria began, but Carolina cut her off. "I don't care what Ricardo said. If you all want to keep partying, pay for it yourselves. I'm leaving." She turned to go, but just then, a waiter approached the table with a tray and the bill. The young man hesitated, glancing between Carolina and Dolores. "Excuse me," he said. "Mr. Herrera asked me to give the check to his wife. He said he was having trouble with his card and that you would handle it." Carolina took the check and went numb when she saw the total. 354,182 pesos. She couldn't believe her eyes. That was more than the car she had bought last year. "I will not be paying this," she said firmly, handing the check back to the waiter. "My husband ran out of the restaurant and left me here with his family. I never agreed to this dinner, and I never promised to cover it." The waiter looked helplessly at the bill, then at Carolina. "But Senora, the check must be settled. Otherwise, we'll have to call security and the police." "Call them," Carolina said with a nod. "I'll be happy to explain how my husband and his family set this trap." Dolores, who had been sitting stone-faced, suddenly sprang to her feet. "Carolina, what are you saying? What trap? We just wanted to celebrate your anniversary as a family. I'm sure Ricardo just felt unwell." "Enough," Carolina said wearily. "I don't believe a word you're saying. You planned this whole thing in advance. I don't know why, but it clearly wasn't out of love or concern for our marriage." The restaurant manager, whom Carolina had spoken to earlier, approached the table. His flawless smile was gone, replaced by a look of professional concern. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said carefully, "we have a problem with payment. Someone will need to cover the bill, or we'll have to involve law enforcement." "Listen," Uncle Roberto began, "why don't we all chip in? Come on, 350,000 between 20 people. That's..." He tried to do the math in his head, but it was clear that the amount of alcohol he'd consumed wasn't helping his calculations. "That's about 17,500 per person," Carolina said helpfully, "including the children." By the looks on everyone's faces, no one liked the idea. Fernando, Anna's husband, even tried to quietly inch toward the exit, but Anna grabbed his sleeve and yanked him back. "Let's call Ricardo," Margarita suggested. "Maybe he really did feel sick and he's coming back." "He's not answering his phone," Carolina reminded her, "and I don't think he will anytime soon." She turned to the manager. "I'll have to call the police. My husband and his family are trying to force me to pay for a dinner I didn't order and never agreed to." The manager looked irritated. Clearly, public scandals were rare in such an upscale place, and terrible for business. "Senora," he said with barely concealed frustration, "someone must pay. If you won't, perhaps one of your relatives will take responsibility." "They're not my relatives," Carolina said coldly. "They're my husband's family. The same husband who snuck out the back door and left me to deal with all of this." She gestured at the table strewn with half-eaten delicacies, open bottles of luxury alcohol, and discarded napkins. "Carolina, sweetheart," Dolores suddenly said in her most syrupy voice, "let's not cause a scene. You don't want people talking about your husband and your family as swindlers, do you? Think about your reputation, your career." That final attempt at manipulation was the last straw. Carolina pulled out her phone and deliberately dialed the emergency number. "Police? My name is Carolina Herrera. I'm at the restaurant El Dorado. My husband ran out through the service exit, leaving me with his family and a bill for 350,000 pesos. I did not agree to this dinner, and I will not be paying for it. No, I'm not leaving. I'll be waiting here for you." She ended the call and looked around at the guests. The expressions on Ricardo's sisters' faces were a mixture of shock and barely concealed satisfaction. Uncle Roberto had sobered up immediately and was whispering urgently to Dolores. The children had quieted down, not understanding what was happening, but sensing the tension in the room. "The police will be here in 15 minutes, Carolina announced. "I'll wait for them in the lobby. You may continue the celebration if you wish, but be aware that someone will have to pay." She turned and walked toward the exit, feeling every pair of eyes follow her. Just as she reached the door, Dolores caught up with her. "You're making a huge mistake," she hissed. "You really think Ricardo will forgive you for this humiliation? Calling the police to a family celebration?" Carolina stopped and looked her mother-in-law straight in the eye. "And you think I'll forgive Ricardo for leaving me to deal with the aftermath of your family's little party? For throwing me under the bus in front of strangers and running away like a coward?" "He wasn't feeling well," Dolores was nearly shouting now. "He gets migraines. He's a delicate boy. You should be protecting him, not having a hysterical breakdown." "He's 35, Carolina said quietly. "He hasn't been a boy for a long time. And if he really is that weak, so weak he can't stand up to his own mother, then I'm not sure I want to remain his wife." The words spoken in a burst of fury suddenly felt stunningly right. Did she truly want to keep living with a man so dependent on his mother that he let her sabotage their anniversary? A man who fled and left her to clean up the mess? Who lied to her, to his family, to the restaurant staff? Dolores went pale. "You wouldn't dare leave him. He'll fall apart without you." "Don't worry," Carolina replied coldly. "He's got you. You've always taken such good care of him. You can continue." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Dolores standing there, mouth agape. In the restaurant lobby, Carolina sank into a chair and closed her eyes. A hurricane of emotions raged inside her. Hurt, anger, disappointment. But strangely enough, also a sense of relief, as if a crushing weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out and saw a message from Ricardo. "Sorry, my phone died. I felt unwell, went out for air and got lost." The ridiculous lie made her smile bitterly. The phone buzzed again with a second message. Hope Mom took care of everything. She promised to cover the dinner. Carolina didn't bother replying. She knew Dolores had no intention of paying for anything. The whole charade had one goal: to humiliate her, assert control over her son, and perhaps even destroy their marriage. 15 minutes later, two police officers entered the restaurant, a young sergeant and an older, tired-looking lieutenant. The manager rushed to greet them, trying to explain the situation. But Carolina stood up and approached them herself. "Good evening," she said calmly. "I'm Carolina Herrera. I made the call." The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Carolina told her side of the story. The officers took statements from the manager, waiters, and members of Ricardo's family. Dolores tried to paint it all as a misunderstanding, but when a waiter confirmed he had seen Ricardo leave through the service exit, even she fell silent. Eventually, after extensive questioning, the officers concluded that there was no crime committed by Carolina. She had not agreed to the dinner, had not placed any orders, and there was no documentation proving she was responsible for the bill. "We'll file a report," the lieutenant told the restaurant manager. "You can try to recover the amount from Mr. Herrera through legal channels or negotiate a payment plan with his family." Dolores and her children looked crushed. It was obvious that none of them had ever intended to pay for the lavish dinner. Uncle Roberto had disappeared early in the commotion, and the sister's husband stood off to the side, looking sour and awkward. "May I go home now?" Carolina asked the lieutenant. "I'm very tired." "Of course," he nodded, "but we might need a statement from you if the restaurant decides to take legal action." "I understand," Carolina said, handing him her business card. "Call me if needed." She called a taxi and, without saying goodbye to a single Herrera, stepped out into the night. The air outside was cool and fresh after the stuffy restaurant. Carolina took a deep breath, feeling the tension slowly begin to lift. The taxi arrived within a few minutes. The entire ride home, Carolina stared out the window at the city lights flashing by, lost in thought. This hadn't just been a bad evening or a family quarrel. It had been betrayal in its purest form. Ricardo hadn't simply run away. He had planned everything with his mother in advance, deceived her, humiliated her in front of his family and strangers alike. She arrived home at 1:30 in the morning. Unlocking the door with her key, she saw the kitchen light still on. Ricardo was sitting at the table, hunched over a steaming cup of something. When she entered, he looked up, his face guilty, eyes red, as if he'd been crying. "Carolina," he began, rising from his chair, "I can explain everything." "Don't," Carolina stopped him. "Don't explain anything. I already understand." "No, please listen." Ricardo took a step toward her, reaching out. "My phone really did die, and then my head started pounding. I stepped out for some air and I got lost. I couldn't find my way back to the restaurant." Carolina looked at him, unable to believe what she was hearing. Did he really think she would fall for such a ridiculous story? "Ricardo," she said quietly, "you're 35 years old. You've lived in this city your whole life. El Dorado is one of the most famous restaurants here. How could you possibly get lost?" I wasn't feeling well," he mumbled, lowering his eyes. "Migraine. You know how it gets. I just wasn't thinking clearly." "And that's why you told the waiter I would pay the bill? Because of a migraine?" Ricardo went even paler. "I didn't. It was a misunderstanding. I only said I was having trouble with my card and—" "Stop lying," Carolina snapped. "I spoke to the waiter. You clearly told him your wife would cover the bill. 350,000 pesos, Ricardo. For a dinner I didn't order, didn't agree to, and that was supposed to be our private celebration." Ricardo sank back into his chair, as if he no longer had the strength to stand. "Mom said it would be a nice surprise, that you'd enjoy celebrating with the family." "With your family," Carolina corrected him. "The same people who think I'm a career-obsessed bad wife, who can't even hide their disdain because I earn more than their precious Ricardo. Did you really think I'd enjoy that kind of surprise?" "I didn't think," Ricardo muttered. "Mom arranged everything, and I just went along with it." "As always," Carolina finished for him. "Because Mom knows best, right? Mom is always right." She sighed, exhausted, and headed toward the bedroom. "I'm too tired to keep having this conversation. We'll talk tomorrow." "Carolina, wait!" Ricardo jumped up and tried to grab her hand. I swear I didn't want it to go like this. I thought Mom would pay for the dinner. She promised." Carolina stopped and stared at him in disbelief. "And you believed her? After all these years, after all her manipulation and scheming, you seriously believed your mother would pay for a 20-person dinner at the most expensive restaurant in town?" Ricardo said nothing, and in that silence everything became clear. Of course he hadn't believed her. He had known exactly how it would turn out, and he let it happen anyway. "Good night, Ricardo," Carolina said tiredly. "Tomorrow we'll have a serious conversation." She walked into the bedroom and locked the door behind her. The morning was gray and damp. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm, a dull backdrop that woke Carolina before her alarm. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling an unfamiliar emptiness. Last night felt like a bad dream, but reality was worse. Her 5-year marriage had turned out to be an illusion. There was a gentle knock at the door. "Carolina?" Ricardo's voice sounded uncertain. "Are you awake? I made coffee." She didn't answer. She needed a moment to gather her thoughts before facing him again. As she got out of bed, Carolina caught her reflection in the mirror, a tired woman with messy hair and a bitter crease around her lips. Was that really her? The confident, energetic, successful woman she used to be? She took a shower, dressed in a sharp pantsuit, and only then unlocked the bedroom door. The apartment was filled with the smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread. Ricardo was bustling around the kitchen, clearly trying to make up for the night before. "Good morning," he said with a guilty smile. "I thought you might need a good breakfast after yesterday." Carolina sat silently at the table and picked up her coffee cup. Her husband looked terrible, unshaven, red-eyed, and twitchy, like someone who hadn't slept all night. "Caro, I want to apologize," Ricardo began, sitting across from her. "What happened last night was unforgivable. I shouldn't have left. I shouldn't have left you there alone." "Why did you do it?" Carolina's voice was calm, almost indifferent. Ricardo rubbed his face with both hands. "I panicked. When I saw the total, when I realized Mom had ordered the most expensive things on the menu, I just got scared and ran. It was cowardly and shameful, I know." "But you knew in advance what she was planning." Carolina watched his reaction closely. "You brought me to that restaurant knowing your whole family would be there, knowing your mother had arranged a banquet neither of us could afford." "I didn't think it would be that expensive," Ricardo mumbled. "Mom said she just wanted to surprise us with a family celebration. She promised it would be modest, within reason." "And you believed her?" Carolina set the cup down. "After everything, you really believed your mother would plan a modest celebration? That she wouldn't take the chance to once again show everyone what a terrible wife I supposedly am?" Ricardo lowered his eyes. "She doesn't think you're a bad wife. She just worries that you work too much. And we—" "Stop," Carolina interrupted him. "Don't repeat her words. Your mother has been against our marriage from the beginning. She's done everything she could to turn you against me. And last night, she crossed every possible line." At that moment, the doorbell rang. The sharp, insistent chime cut through the heavy silence in the apartment. Carolina and Ricardo exchanged glances. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. Ricardo shook his head, but there was fear in his eyes. He clearly had a good guess as to who might show up this early. Carolina walked to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 men in uniform were standing outside, the lieutenant and sergeant from the restaurant the night before. She opened the door. "Good morning," the lieutenant said. "Carolina Herrera?" "Yes, that's me." "Lieutenant Martinez," he introduced himself. "We were at the restaurant yesterday. Does Ricardo Herrera reside here?" "Yes," Carolina nodded. "Come in." The officers stepped into the apartment. Ricardo stood by the kitchen doorway, pale as a sheet. "Ricardo Herrera?" the lieutenant addressed him. "Yes," Ricardo replied barely audibly. "You need to come with us to the station to give a formal statement regarding the incident at the restaurant El Dorado," the lieutenant said in an official tone. "The restaurant has filed a fraud complaint." "Fraud?" Ricardo repeated, going even paler. "But I didn't. I just—" "All explanations will be taken at the station," the lieutenant cut him off. "Please collect your ID and come with us." Ricardo looked helplessly at Carolina. "Caro, what should I do?" Carolina looked at her husband and didn't recognize him. Where was the confident man she had met 5 years ago? What happened to his ambition, his self-respect? Standing in front of her was a frightened, lost man, someone who, even now in a moment of crisis, couldn't make a decision on his own. "Take your passport and your phone," she said calmly, "and go with the officers. Tell them the truth about last night." "The whole truth?" Ricardo repeated, panic creeping into his voice. "But, Mom—" "Forget about your mother," Carolina cut him off. "Think about yourself, about the consequences of your actions." Ricardo, his legs weak beneath him, walked to the hallway, pulled his passport from a drawer, and silently followed the officers. At the door, he turned back. "Will you be here when I get back?" Carolina didn't answer. She didn't know herself whether she would be there or whether she even wanted him to return. When the door closed behind Ricardo and the police, Carolina returned to the kitchen and mechanically finished her now cold coffee. Her mind was racing with fragments of thought, flashes from the previous night, and scattered memories from their 5 years together. How had she failed to see how deeply dependent Ricardo was on his mother? How had she allowed herself to ignore his cowardice, his weakness, his inability to defend their marriage? Her phone buzzed on the table. It was Patricia, her friend and co-worker. "Hi," Carolina answered, trying to keep her voice steady. "How are you?" Patricia asked, skipping the pleasantries. "I tried calling you all night. What happened at your anniversary? Did Ricardo plan something special?" "Oh, yes," Carolina replied bitterly. "Very special. So special that he's currently on his way to the police station to give a statement." "What?" Patricia's voice shot up an octave. "Carolina, what on earth happened?" Carolina took a deep breath and gave her a quick rundown of the previous night. The surprise banquet with 20 relatives, Dolores ordering everything off the premium menu, Ricardo fleeing out the service entrance, the police showing up at the restaurant, and this morning's visit from the officers. "Unbelievable," Patricia breathed when Carolina finished. "That's insane. What now?" "I don't know," Carolina admitted. "Ricardo will probably have to compensate the restaurant. 350,000 pesos isn't exactly pocket change." "And your marriage?" Patricia asked gently. Carolina was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I don't know, Patri. Last night I thought it was over, that I could never forgive a betrayal like that. But today, I just don't understand how we got here. How did I not see how incapable my husband is?" "Listen," Patricia said, her tone firm now. "I'm coming over. You shouldn't be alone right now." "No need." Carolina shook her head, though her friend couldn't see it. "I need some time. I need to think." "You sure?" Patricia asked, doubtful. "Absolutely, but thank you. Really." After hanging up, Carolina called her office and asked for the day off. For the first time in years, she couldn't bring herself to think about projects, deadlines, or clients. It all felt distant and meaningless. She sat in the kitchen, staring blankly out the window when her phone rang again. The screen showed her mother-in-law's number. Carolina hesitated only a second before answering. "Yes?" she said coldly. "Carolina, it's Dolores," came the anxious voice on the other end. "Did you know Ricardo was taken to the police? This is a nightmare. We need to do something immediately." "And what exactly do you suggest we do?" Carolina asked. "We need to find a lawyer," Dolores exclaimed. "A good one, a top-tier one. You make a good living. I'm sure you have some savings." Carolina couldn't believe what she was hearing. After everything that had happened, this woman was still trying to manipulate her, still trying to use her money to get her son out of a mess Dolores herself had orchestrated. "Dolores," Carolina said calmly, "you organized that banquet yesterday. You ordered the most expensive food and drinks. You turned Ricardo against me. And now you're calling to ask me for money to hire a lawyer? What are you saying?" Dolores's voice took on an offended tone. "I only wanted to arrange a nice family celebration. It was Ricardo who suggested the restaurant. I merely supported his idea." "Don't lie," Carolina said, feeling anger steadily rising within her. "I saw your messages to Ricardo. The whole thing, the banquet, the escape through the service exit, the credit card story, it was all planned in advance. By you." There was silence on the line. Then Dolores spoke again, in a completely different tone, cold and calculating. I don't know what you're talking about. There were no messages. You're making things up because you don't want to admit your own guilt. My guilt? Carolina almost laughed. And what exactly am I guilty of? Of destroying a family, Dolores said crisply. My son was a wonderful young man before he met you. You crushed him with your ambitions and your career. Because of you, he dropped out of school, lost a good job. Ricardo lost his job because his company shut down, Carolina reminded her, and he quit college long before he ever met me. Don't try to shift the blame onto me. You're a bad wife, Dolores continued relentlessly. You don't cook, don't create a cozy home. You haven't given him a child. All you care about is work and spending money on yourself. Something inside Carolina finally snapped. For years, she had tried to be the perfect wife, meeting Ricardo's family's expectations, cooking dinners, keeping the home clean, paying bills when Ricardo couldn't. And now, after all of that, to hear this kind of accusation. You know what, Dolores, she said, her voice icy. I'm done listening to this. I'm not paying for a lawyer, and I'm not continuing this conversation. If you abandon my son in a moment like this, Dolores said, her voice now threatening, you'll regret it. We'll take you to court for everything you've taken from him. I haven't taken anything from Ricardo, Carolina replied. The apartment was mine before the marriage. I bought the car with my own money, and our joint savings, they're gone, poured into his startup experiments. You'll regret this, Dolores hissed and hung up. Carolina set the phone down on the table and took a deep breath. That conversation had made everything crystal clear. For 5 years, she had been used. For 5 years, she had been the family's cash cow. And all that time, Ricardo had allowed it, had participated in it. Her thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell. This time, standing on the threshold was her father, a tall, solid man with graying temples and a firm gaze. Enrique Mendoza had once been a military officer and now owned a small but successful construction company. Dad? Carolina said in surprise. What are you doing here? Patricia called, he said simply. Told me you were having trouble with your husband. He stepped into the apartment and took in the space with an assessing glance. Where's Ricardo? At the police station, giving a statement, Carolina replied, heading to the kitchen. Want some coffee? I do, her father nodded, following her. And a full explanation of what happened. Carolina set the kettle to boil and began her story. She spoke not only of the previous evening, but also of how things had gradually changed in her relationship with Ricardo. How he had gone from ambitious and driven to weak and dependent on his mother. How he had lost interest in his career, stopped striving for independence, and started blaming her for his failures. Enrique listened in silence, occasionally asking a clarifying question. When Carolina finished, he stared out the window for a long while, lost in thought. I always believed I should trust your judgment, he said at last. You're a smart girl. You've never given me a reason to doubt your good sense. But this marriage, it was a mistake from the very beginning. Carolina lowered her eyes. She knew her father had never been fond of Ricardo, but out of respect for her choice, he had never said so. You know, Enrique continued, when I met your mother, she was more successful than me, earned more, had bigger career prospects. Some of my friends said it was humiliating being supported by a woman, but I never thought that. I was proud of her success. I supported her, and I worked hard to catch up, to be worthy of a woman like her. He took a sip of coffee and went on. A real man isn't afraid of a successful woman, Enrique said. He's inspired by her. He grows with her. But Ricardo, he chose a different path, a path of dependency, manipulation, and shifting responsibility. What should I do, Dad? Carolina asked quietly. I don't know if I can forgive such betrayal. Do you need to forgive it? Enrique looked at his daughter intently. Betrayal isn't an accident. It's a choice, a conscious decision Ricardo made, not just yesterday, but for many months leading up to it. At that moment, Carolina's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Ricardo was calling. Yes, she answered. Carolina. His voice was low and defeated. I'm at the station. They've charged me with fraud. If I don't pay the bill within 24 hours, the restaurant will push for a criminal case. Carolina said nothing. She didn't know what to say. Caro, please. Ricardo's voice turned pleading. I don't have that kind of money. Maybe you could... No, Carolina said firmly. I'm not going to pay for your cowardice and your lies. But Caro... Ricardo was almost crying now. They might put me in jail. I'll lose my job. Lose everything. You already lost everything, Carolina said quietly. You lost it yesterday when you chose your mother's plan over standing by your own wife. What plan? Ricardo asked in confusion. Carolina, what are you talking about? I saw your messages, Ricardo, she said tiredly. I accidentally opened your phone this morning while you were in the shower. I just wanted to check the time. And there it was. A message from your mother. Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything is going according to plan. Let that upstart pay for the family dinner, and if she refuses, pretend you've got card issues and leave through the back door. Let her find out what it means to be the real head of the household. The line went dead silent. Then Ricardo's voice returned. Different now, bitter and angry. You went through my phone. That's an invasion of privacy. You had no right. Carolina could hardly believe her ears. After everything that had happened, that was what he was upset about? Goodbye, Ricardo, she said firmly. When you come home, your things will be waiting in the hallway. She hung up the phone and turned to her father. You heard all that? Enrique nodded. I can't say I'm surprised, but there's something else we need to do. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Jorge, it's Enrique Mendoza. Listen, I need your help. My former son-in-law got himself into some trouble. Carolina listened as her father spoke to his old friend, who happened to be the owner of the restaurant group that included El Dorado. From what she gathered, Enrique was asking him not to pursue criminal charges against Ricardo, but insisting that Ricardo pay back the full amount. Thanks, my friend, Enrique ended the call. I owe you. He turned to Carolina. There won't be a criminal case as long as Ricardo repays the full amount within a week, but he'll have to take out a loan or borrow from his precious mother. Thank you, Dad, Carolina said, feeling tears sting her eyes. I really don't want him to go to jail because of me. Not because of you, Enrique said firmly, because of his actions. Everyone has to be accountable for their decisions. And if Ricardo chose to follow his mother's orders instead of supporting his wife, then he must deal with the consequences. They spent the rest of the day packing Ricardo's things. Carolina was surprised to find how little of real value or personal meaning he had in their shared home. A few suits, some gym clothes, unread books, electronics she had bought. Everything fit into a few boxes, which they stacked neatly in the hallway. Around 7 in the evening, the doorbell rang. Ricardo stood on the threshold, pale, gaunt, and with red, sleep-deprived eyes. Carolina, he began, but fell silent when he saw her father behind her. Good evening, Enrique. Ricardo, Enrique replied with a curt nod. Your things are ready. You can take them. Carolina, please. Ricardo turned his eyes to his wife. Let's talk. I can explain everything. What you saw in those messages, it's not what you think. And what should I think? Carolina asked calmly. That your mother didn't plan to set me up? That you didn't know about her plan? That you didn't run away and leave me to deal with the consequences? I panicked, Ricardo burst out. Yes, Mom suggested the plan, but I never thought it would go that far. I meant to come back, but when I saw the size of the bill... Enough, Enrique interrupted him. You need to understand that your marriage to Carolina is over. She deserves better than a man who can't stand up to his own mother's manipulation. That's none of your business, Ricardo snapped suddenly. This is between me and Carolina. Anything that affects my daughter is my business, Enrique replied firmly, and I won't let you manipulate her again. Take your things and go. And by the way, you have 1 week to pay the restaurant bill. Otherwise, they'll take you to court. Carolina watched the exchange silently. She realized with surprising clarity that Ricardo no longer made her angry or even hurt. All she felt was exhaustion and a vague sense of regret for the years she had lost. I'll take the boxes, Ricardo mumbled, avoiding her gaze. But this isn't the end, Carolina. We'll talk again, when you've calmed down. There's nothing left to say, she replied quietly. Everything that needed to be said has been said and done. He began gathering the boxes, stacking them by the door. I need to call a taxi. I can't carry all this at once. I'll help, Enrique offered unexpectedly. My car's downstairs. We'll load your things and I'll drop you off, wherever you want. Ricardo looked surprised but nodded. Thanks, I'll go to my mom's. Just temporarily, of course, until I find my own place. Of course, Enrique said dryly. Temporarily. Ricardo left. A month later, Carolina learned that he was still living with his mother and had no plans to move out. In the evenings, he worked part-time washing dishes in the same restaurant chain to pay off his loan. Apparently, family banquets were no longer in his budget.